Hey, what is up guys, Merganman4 here, and today I'm going to be giving you my thoughts and opinions on the Tsuranga Conundrum, which officially brings us to the halfway point of Series 11. So, the Tsuranga Conundrum is maybe a little bit of a conundrum itself. It's a little bit of a mishmash of an episode, I found. It's got a decent amount of elements that I enjoy, but also a decent amount that I don't enjoy. And as usual, I'm going to be going through and giving you my thoughts on that. I do actually really like how it starts out. We begin in this junkyard planet, and the Doctor and Graham, Ryan, and Yaz are looking for something. They're helping her to try and find something. It doesn't really matter what. I wasn't really bothered that we don't find out what it is. When they stumble upon a sonic mine, which explodes and puts them in what appears to be a hospital, but it actually turns out to be a spaceship, and they're taken away from the TARDIS, and this episode ends up being a classic-style base under siege story. I really like this kind of setup and introduction. It throws you kind of right into the adventure, which we don't always get. We usually start out with the TARDIS landing somewhere, and I think this is a much more interesting way of getting these characters here and making sure that they can't just escape in the TARDIS than the TARDIS landing on said spaceship and something happening to it that causes our characters to not be able to reach it. Because before, one that I'm thinking of is in Cold War, the ship materializes on a submarine and dematerializes again because the Doctor reset the HADs, which, granted, is a fun little reference to the 1968 story, The Crotons, I believe. But it is, I do feel like it is a little bit of a lazy way to cut off your characters from the TARDIS, so I like this way of doing it. I saw some people complaining online that the TARDIS is gone again, she just got it back, but I didn't really have that issue because it's just gone for the episode. They established that they can get back to the TARDIS at the end of the episode, of course, and this is hardly the first episode, because as with most Base Under Sieges, where they can't get to the TARDIS. But yeah, I did really enjoy this introduction. Apparently the Doctor and her friends have been asleep for 4 days as they've been recovering, and the Doctor is trying to get out because she wants to get back to the TARDIS, obviously. Especially because it's a junk planet, and she's afraid someone might try and steal it, which I like that little idea. But she doesn't realize that it's actually a spaceship, and she doesn't realize it until one of the crew points it out to her. And I don't mind this because the Doctor has been recovering, and there's another thing that's brought up actually, where she's desperate to try and turn the ship around to get back to her TARDIS. And one of the medics, Astos, he tells her that that's being incredibly selfish and hostile, and she doesn't think it is until he points out that it's his duty to get all the patients on the ship to a more secure location so that he can make sure that they're all safe and can get healed properly because it doesn't have all the facilities necessary. And she realizes, of course, that he's right. And I like these kinds of flaws that are happening here. I don't think that the Doctor should have them all the time, because normally, of course, the Doctor would be at the top of her game and wouldn't, make these kinds of mistakes, but she has been hit by a sonic mine, and so that gives her a little bit of extra fallibility here at the beginning of the episode, and it makes for, again, an interesting way to introduce us to the situation that's going on. One thing I would like to point out, though, is I thought it was a little bit weird that the Doctor wasn't fully recovered when she woke up. All of her companions were, but she kept clutching her lower abdomen and stumbling around. This stopped pretty early on, and then it came back briefly later in the episode, but it never leads anywhere. So I didn't really understand the point of not having her fully healed, because it didn't really do anything for the story. It never affects anything, and it never really raises the stakes or slows things down. It's just kind of an unnecessary detail that doesn't play into anything. Anyway, in this medical ship, we have a few of our guest characters. We've got Astos, Madly. Those are both the nurses on the ship. There's not any crew because it's fully automated. And then you've got a couple of patients. You have Yos, I think his name is. He's a pregnant man who's giving birth. You have Captain Cicero, who used to be this great space pilot and general, and then her brother and her android servant. That's our guest cast for the episode. Now, I'm kind of in two minds about this. In one regard, I don't actively dislike any of them. I actually really like Astos. I thought he was really good in the episode, and I really enjoyed him on screen, but as it turns out, he's the only character to die, and he dies pretty early on. So, oh well. But I like his attitude towards the Doctor, and his attitude towards his job and his patients, and I thought the actor did a good job in the role. I found him entertaining to watch. Madly in her arc was pretty good as well. Gradually, she starts out not very confident in herself, but she gradually starts to feel more confident in herself. The patients are where it feels a little less, I guess, necessary. The pregnant man, Yas, he doesn't really add a whole lot aside from some comic relief, and also to give Graham and Ryan something to do later in the episode, which isn't really connected to the plot that much. I'm going to get into... there are some parallels with Ryan and his life. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But I didn't really find that Yas added too much for me. And neither did the General Cicero and her relationship with her brother and her android. I never really got too much from that. I found their characters to be generally pretty forgettable, especially the android. The android was such a pointless character. He didn't do a single thing in this episode. Like, you could remove him from the plot and you wouldn't even know that he was gone. Like, if you cut him out of all his scenes, not a difference. And that's just a shame, because I like when, writers try to expand their worlds a little bit and try to add these different kinds of characters to make their worlds feel more alive. But you also have to give all your characters a specific role, and this android doesn't even have one. You think this might come into play a little bit later, where we specifically find out because he's an android, he has an advantage that they can use against the threat later in the episode. But that doesn't even come into play because there's another solution that ends up being used. So, yeah, I just found his character completely pointless and did not add anything whatsoever. However, not talking about the side characters, but our leads, I think that this is probably the best outing so far for Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. I think she's definitely starting to find her feet and come a bit into her own. In the earlier episodes, I did feel a lot like she was basically just playing a mixture of the 10th and 11th Doctors. I still feel that to a bit, like a decent degree, but at the same time, I think she's starting to come into her own. I can't really point out any specific unique characteristics to her incarnation yet. Hopefully we'll get some by the end of the season, but she's definitely starting to feel a little bit more distinct from 10 and 11 than she did earlier in the season, which I'm happy about. And she also has some really nice, lovely moments in this episode where she's talking about, who she is and what she stands for. I love the scene where she's saying all the things that she's a doctor of. She lists, 10 things and ends it off with hope. I think that's lovely. And I just love her attitude throughout the episode. Jodie Whittaker is just shining in the role. We also have our companions who are not served as well. I am still continuing to like them, generally, but halfway through the series, I'm still not feeling the justification for 3 companions. For the first 15-20 minutes, I honestly didn't even register Yaz being there. Like, by the time we met the creature, I honestly didn't even know if Yaz had a single line in the episode. Upon rewatch, I realized she had, but she didn't really make much of an impact until that point in the episode. Ryan and Graham don't have a whole lot to do in this. They're mainly just helping with the pregnant man and him giving birth. Graham's still the only companion that's actually leaving an impact on me, mainly down to Bradley Walsh's fantastic portrayal. But yeah, Yaz and Ryan, I'm not disliking them, but they just still aren't impacting me. And there's one scene in here where Chibnall tries to flesh out Ryan's character a bit more. He talks a bit more about his dad and his mom and how his mom died and how his dad left. But I feel like that definitely could have been implemented a lot better because it felt very clunky where it was. It just stopped the story dead in its spot and went on for a couple of minutes. And that just didn't feel natural at all to me whatsoever. Chibnall's done a much better job in previous episodes of fleshing out these characters in a more natural way. But anyway, back to the plot itself. This ship ends up coming into contact with a creature called a pating. And this pating has been pretty controversial online, actually. Mainly because of its appearance. I'll admit, the first time I saw it, I did not like it whatsoever. I started to like it a little bit more. I'm not about to say that I really like it, but I don't really mind it anymore. It's definitely an interesting way to do a creature like this. I will say I love the concept of the pating. It's a creature that is essentially indestructible, undefeatable, and incredibly deadly. It's got toxic skin. It can eat pretty much anything. It's pretty much invulnerable, and actually the solution of the episode revolves around that. And it's incredibly fast, and so the concept of that is really neat. And as I mentioned, the design isn't exactly the most threatening thing. I would have preferred something that was a little bit more menacing, but it's not terrible. It's fine. Not ideal, but fine. And well, part of that is because of its cuteness, I never really felt too threatened by it, and also the fact that we never really see what it can do. The closest it gets to showing how dangerous it is, I'm pretty sure it's accidental. It accidentally ejects Astos in one of the life pods, which then explodes. And like I mentioned, that's the only death in this episode. That's the closest we get to seeing how dangerous it truly is. I wish either the creature was more terrifying to look at, it actually displayed its deadliness and power a bit more, or a little bit of both. So in that sense, the creature was a little bit of a letdown, but I did really like the concept. Oh, and another thing too, so when we first see the creature, it actually eats the Doctor's sonic screwdriver, and then proceeds to spit it out, which, upon reflection after watching the episode, seems a little bit weird because it just completely consumes everything else. That's the only thing it ever spits out. But anyway, the significance of this is, when it eats it, it drains the screwdriver of its energy. And you think, oh, that's great. Chibnall is, taking out the screwdriver for the rest of the episode, raising the stakes. But for some reason, this never comes into play. So later on in the episode, the Sonic functions again perfectly fine. The Doctor describes it as clever Sonic self-rebooting, and I'm like, what? For one thing, that just completely removes any sort of stakes you can have if something like that ever happens again. It makes it seem completely pointless because the screwdriver, you should be removing the screwdriver to make things more difficult for the Doctor. To be able to have it reboot itself on its own, it just takes that element away. And not only after it reboots does it never do anything that couldn't have been done without the screwdriver, but in the time where it has been taken out, there was no reason to have used the screwdriver. And the fact that the screwdriver gets drained is completely irrelevant. Especially, now I'm thinking about it, because the whole resolution revolves around the Doctor's revelation that the creature consumes energy, but she doesn't realize that because of the screwdriver. So there is, kind of like the android, actually, in this episode, there is no reason for this plot point to exist. There is no impact whatsoever. If it got drained, it should have just been taken out for the rest of the episode, and that would have made it feel like it was, worth taking out. But even then, even if you bring it back, then there should be something in that chunk where it's not working to make you feel the loss of the screwdriver, to make that significant, or the energy drain is what tips the Doctor off to how to defeat the creature. But none of that happens. So for all intents and purposes, again, you could cut out the scene where the pating drains the screwdriver of energy. You wouldn't even notice. You would not even notice. I do want to say though, so as when they figure this out, they realize that they're going to have to protect the antimatter core that's powering the ship, and it's at this point where the Doctor gives a little bit of sciencey information about antimatter. I know some people didn't like it, but I personally loved it. I think it's great when Doctor Who has his little educational elements, and I thought that the Doctor delivering the speech like that was wonderful. Just how in awe the Doctor was about this method of power, about this aspect of science. It's a beautiful little moment from Jodie Whittaker, and I don't know, I think there's a certain charm to those little educational aspects. I like that Chibnall's kind of going back to Doctor Who's roots and doing that a little bit. That's a really good choice on his part. But anyway, not much else happens until the Doctor figures out the solution. There is a subplot of the General having to try to fly the ship, but she's having difficulties because she has a disease, and it ends up actually killing her when she's trying to fly the ship to the medical base, and the brother has to take her place, which you realize if the brother could take her place in the first place, why did the person with the disease have to be flying it? But here's the thing, that is such an unimportant subplot that I barely even really thought to discuss it. The thought literally just popped into my head as I was coming near, because I have a sheet, right? I write down a list of things that I want to make sure I discuss in the episode. I completely didn't even think to write that down. And also, the whole segment with the pregnant man giving birth and stuff, I didn't really write that down either, because there's not a whole lot of interesting things that go on there. And these are subplots that take up a decent chunk of the runtime. And that's actually one of the major issues I think this episode has. As much as I enjoy some of the other elements, there's so much of this episode that they just don't leave an impact on me. And I barely even remember to talk about them. One thing I do want to mention about the pregnant man, though, actually, I mentioned there's a parallel going on with Ryan. So he's talking about his dad. His dad has been brought up a couple of times, and how his dad isn't there for him. And this pregnant man, Yoss, he was going to give up the baby when it's born because he doesn't feel like he can be a good father, but Ryan encourages him to keep the baby so that the baby has his father with him. And this is another element of the episode I kind of felt was a little bit clunky. I don't know, I didn't feel anything about it. I think I know what the problem is, actually. I feel like when you do subplots like this, they should have some sort of relevance to the main plot. But this doesn't, which is the main thing, right? It's completely separate and on its own. So it's good that Chibnall's trying to expand his character more, but like the earlier conversation that I mentioned between him and Yaz, it just doesn't really add anything at all and could easily be removed. It's not really relevant to what's going on. Anyway, another element I forgot to mention that's actually important to the whole resolution is there's a bomb in the ship that could blow up because if the medical base that the ship is going to finds out that there's a pating on board, it'll blow up the ship to prevent it from reaching the patients, but it also has it there as a backup device in case it goes rogue from what they want it to do, I guess. And the Doctor realizes that since this thing is basically indestructible and wants to eat energy, it can eat the bomb, saves them from the bomb, and it gets rid of the pating. So she sets it up, sets it on a timer, and I do like the Doctor asks Yaz for a random number between 0 and 100, and she sets that as the amount of time left on the bomb. And there's a little bit of a spat between them as Yaz is saying, well, I would have gone higher if I knew this was what you were doing. I don't know, I thought that was pretty funny. But the pating comes in, eats the bomb, blows up inside it, and because they lured it into the airlock with it and let him go into space in the airlock. And that's that. I know a lot of people have been criticizing Chibnall's resolutions. I thought that this was a pretty decent resolution. I don't really see the issue with it. I thought it was fair. It played by the rules that we were given. It didn't really feel rushed to me. So, yeah, I thought the resolution was fine. But that's pretty much it, actually. That's really weird, because this is easily the shortest review I've done for Series 11. When I started doing these reviews with Series 10, most of my reviews ended up around this time, but I guess with Series 11 I've had a lot more to talk about, and maybe just as I've continued doing reviews, I've just gotten more comfortable with talking about more things, but I don't have anything else to discuss about this episode. And I think that's one of its big faults, actually. Throughout the episode, I didn't find myself disliking it, but I just kind of felt it was kind of bland and without personality and just overall forgettable. I've mentioned before, I always watch episodes twice before I do my review. This is the first time this season, and actually the first time I can remember since I was doing reviews, that I wasn't looking forward to rewatching the episode. Now, that doesn't mean I was, like, dreading it. It's kind of, in the middle ground. It's like I wouldn't complain about rewatching it, but I didn't feel a desire to rewatch it, is the thing. Because even with the Ghost Monument, which I ended up giving a 6 out of 10, I wanted to watch it again because I felt like I could get more from it. But with the Tsuranga Conundrum, I didn't really feel that. It just left me... I don't know, it was entertaining enough throughout. It just doesn't leave anything with me. And it just doesn't really have any depth to it. So I guess, it's a fine adventure if you turn your brain off and you just want to sit there and, I don't know, be entertained for 50 minutes, but didn't leave any sort of impact with me, which is its major thing. So unfortunately, despite the things that I liked about it, I think, unfortunately, the Tsuranga Conundrum is going to have to be my lowest episode this season. It's not bad, but it's not good either. It's simply mediocre, and I'm going to give it a 5.5 out of 10. Now, because we are halfway through the series, I do want to briefly talk about how I'm feeling about this series halfway through. As I mentioned, I still feel like the three companions a little bit too much, but I'm loving Graham. I'm thinking that Jodie Whittaker is doing a pretty great job in the role, and I'm excited to see where else these characters go through the rest of the season. It's going to be interesting now because Chris Chibnall has written 4 of these 5 episodes and co-written the other one. So we have not yet had a essentially Chibnall-less episode because it's not until next week where we get our first episode that doesn't have a writing credit for Chibnall. And we're going to get 4 of those in a row. So that'll be a bit of a different change. I'm guessing Chibnall wrote so many episodes this season because he wanted to set up these characters and their adventures, which makes sense because episode 4 was actually the first time, at the end of episode 4, where everything was properly set up. And I do know that this episode was originally supposed to be written by a guest writer who had to drop out. So maybe that's in part where some of this episode's problems come from. It's a bit more last minute than other ones. So how is it doing overall? For the episode average, we're currently looking at a 7 out of 10, which definitely isn't bad. That is generally around the score I'd give an average Doctor Who episode. Keep in mind, when I use the word average, I don't mean mediocre, I mean like literally average episode score. So it's definitely far from being bad. But unfortunately, when I compare it to other seasons, by the 5 episode point, this is the season with the lowest series average. By the halfway point, I think there are 1 or 2 seasons I'd put below it. Maybe 1 season below it and 1 season tied with it. I can't quite remember. But no matter how you slice it, it's definitely on the lower end of season averages. But again, that's not to say it's necessarily bad, just not as good as what's come before. And there's definitely still time to improve. We have 5 episodes left, which could absolutely up the series rating, especially since, 3 of the 5 episodes I've scored higher than the series average. So there's definitely a chance for it to go up. And also other series for them to go down, which would make Series 11 higher in the ranking. But only time will tell. So it's doing fine. But yeah, it's not as good as RTD or Moffat, I don't think. But far from bad. Definitely far from bad. So overall, still positive from me, and I'm still looking forward to what the second half of the series holds. But anyway, that is my review of the Tsuranga Conundrum, and my brief thoughts on the series halfway through. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And please put your thoughts and opinions on the Tsuranga Conundrum down below, and maybe your halfway series thoughts as well. But anyway, that's it for me, and I'll be with you guys again next week with Demons of the Punjab.